So yeah, I've been arguing with the spirits a little bit more. Cat is here again. That's nice. I love Cat. Also, I have really conflicted feelings about Sekhmet recently. It makes me feel weird. And I don't know how to describe it or if I even want to describe it. Um, you know the... No, I can't describe it. I can't describe it. I have a crush on her now. I did not have a crush on her before. And I can't tell if I'm... I can't tell what I'm feeling. And it scares me. Because when it comes to that spiritual realm, I've kind of just been completely zoned out. Because without medication, um, like the SSRIs and stuff, it's taken me a while to come back around to just even being able to see or imagine that there's an astral realm. Now, I overcompensate for that quite a bit. So one thing that you're going to see is that it doesn't appear that I can't see into the astral realm. But the other thing that you'll see is that I'm using copious amounts of psychoactive chemicals, from caffeine to THC. And so then that provides a little bit of that. Now I'm pulling away from THC, and I also, when I'm getting away from nicotine, I have much less of an addiction to caffeine. So it's kind of like the nicotine blocks it. Like while I'm buzzed on nicotine, I can see well, and then once I'm away from that, then I need caffeine and more caffeine and more caffeine and more caffeine as the tolerance starts to build. It just goes insane. But from 2023, yeah, I just very abruptly quit my meds. I actually checked my notebook LM. I checked notebook LM and I was like, give me a medication history. And I'm gonna write that down in here so that I have it. Because it goes back speculatively to 2007, more literatively 2013, with those clinical notes. And then I just don't have release of information for stuff in between 2013 yet and 2020. But then from 2020, and maybe a little bit sooner, but 2020 to 2023, all of that record is in place. So we can actually get a medication timeline and history going. But then in 2023, when I'm like, I'm done, I abruptly quit like all of my medications. So this is the part where I just really, if people jumped on the immediate spiritual bandwagon and everybody agrees with me fallacy, of like, yeah, 2023, what happened? Oh, THC started to happen, and then you quit your job and all this other stuff happened. It's like, yeah, what happened was I was realizing that the me that I started as in 2020, when I went to go get a job, was completely unrecognizable and inhuman to the me. Like, the me that is in 2023 is inhuman to the me that is in 2020. And once I realized that, I realized something is happening. This is bad because I'm like fighting being pre-diabetic. I'm not healthy. I don't have a good conception of time. I keep saying to my partner that we've been going out for a certain amount of years and being wrong by like 3 years. And I keep going on a yearly cycle loop, and she's having a lot of trouble dealing with me because I'm not even present, and so she's having to deal with Phoenix and Ket effectively, but she's dealing with more and more Saturn. So we were taking medications to make the Saturn complex, or the the sympathetic nervous system complex of my identities. Like, we were taking medications so that we didn't have to deal with them, and the medications basically made us lock into that. And so she started dating somebody, and then by 2023, it was apparent through and through that the person she started dating is not the person she's dating now. And so then I just got off all the medication, and that made it a lot worse in the short term. And I used THC to cope with a lot of that. And I've learned some terms here in 2024 and 2025 that match that description really well. That akathisia, that akathisia is real. And yeah, that's why low-key when people are just saying that I'm lazy and stuff, the majority of my day is spent pacing back and forth and talking to myself. So I noticed that when I'm doing the 24/7 audio diary, I don't include everything in the audio diary anyway. Like, I will step away from the audio diary to go have a conversation privately with myself. So I've kind of just stopped the diary because it kind of becomes performative. But now I have a lot of practice, and every part of my system has a lot of practice identifying when we're starting to like try to meet and check boxes versus when we're trying to just explain our own experience. So that's good. And yeah, it's been 3 years since psychiatric medication, and in 2025 we had to fight to be able to continue that, and they wanted to mark me with cannabis use disorder so that they don't have to compete with the alternative that is going to work a lot better, to be honest, in my opinion. So I've tried 14 other medications. It's not that I'm not willing to try or I was never willing to try medications. It's that I'm not willing to try medications now, when after I was saying one thing works, and that's THC, and it helps with my anxiety, and then I get told all of the time that no, it doesn't. It actually makes it worse in the long run. And I'm like, right, okay, I guess so, but I don't think so, because I think I've been using it in the long run and it doesn't make my anxiety worse. There's a lot of things in reality that makes my anxiety worse. And then they're like, see, that's how it creeps up on you, you know? But let's just say I have complex post-traumatic, let's just say I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and part of the symptomological cluster in that is minimization of overall symptoms. So I grew up around parents that would minimize, and so that started to not only form itself into my linguistics, but my actual neurology. So when I was saying anxiety, a better word for that is panic, where not hyperventilating panic, but like the opposite of locking in, like falling into the sunken place dissociation, or falling out into the sky, like dissociation from above, right? So we have an as above so below complex, and we just start to go with hermetics, and then we say that's anxiety. So it's not me panicking so covertly that my brain is trying to find a way to leave my body. It's that I have anxiety. Well, now THC is good for treating panic, and it's not good for treating anxiety. And this is what I want you guys to realize. When it comes to gender therapy, if you get a term wrong in 2018, 2019, your doctor is likely to tell you what the right term is to continue the current treatment, because they assume that that treatment is effective because you're saying that it's effective. But when I'm saying THC helps treat my anxiety, there's no further examination of like, what do you mean by anxiety? Because it really doesn't, most people, it doesn't super help with that. And then I'm sure there's a lot of people that if they're watching this video are like, it helps with my anxiety. Well, what do you think about my description of my anxiety? Does that sound familiar? Anyway, so it's just like, so from 16 years old to 17 years old, when I'm like, this is what helps, and in 2013 when I'm like, this is kind of helps, it's assumed, well, we got to stop that though, because yeah, that's not a patient's review of a potential medication. that is an addict's cognitive impairment due to their chemical dependency and substance use disorder. You know? And so before we have a bunch of trans people saying that I should figure out what it's like to try to be covertly converted from one way of thinking into another, just understand that for the last 20 years, that's exactly what's happened to me. And so just because I have transitioned and just because I have been on HRT for 10 years doesn't mean that I don't know that the system is a monster. And that's not a lesson that I need to learn again. And I really hope that you didn't wish that lesson on me, because it tends to be that these things just get reflected back. Ever since a bunch of people judged me for not being Christian enough because I considered myself a pagan Christian, so let me unpack this for you. Pagan, I don't ascribe to a church. Pagan. Then I use symbols and my own language to communicate with myself. These masks I made in Pride Institute. They're a symbol of recovery, and also they're a symbol from years ago that I operated as a trinity. So, as God has an image, right? So do I, and I was created in God's image like everybody else. That's the way that I was viewing it. Now I'm viewing it as there's a trinity offset between my so psychiatry in general has fully created the split between one trinity and the next trinity. So the trinity of Venus, myself, Jinx, and then the trinity of Phoenix, Phi, and Ket. So Ket next to Venus, me next to Phoenix, Phi next to Jinx. Still a trinity, but we're just split even further. Anyway, so pagan meaning we use our own symbols, our own language, and we don't let the church tell us how we relate to God. We let the church be somewhere that we commune and find other people that have a relationship with God at large. The Father, the Mother, the Holy Spirit, Christ, and the higher angels, however people view it. And then Christian, that cross. That's a multi-medium cross. It has watercolor and acrylic, and you would not be able to tell. Oh, I'm sorry. You would not be able to tell that it's actually mixed medium like that, because I don't know who made that, but I miss their overall spirit. But that's a Christian symbol, and that was because once I went to Pride and everybody was talking about anti-religion and they hated Catholics and they hated Christians, I was like, I met a lot of really good Christians, and I think that you guys should be hating the church, not the Christians. And so what I mean by pagan Christian is, when I was in Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge, while everybody was saying that Caitlyn Jenner is an idiot, and if they ever ran across a transvestite like that in real life, they would whatever. I went to my psychiatrist and I said, okay, I think I'm transgender, because each time, like, I just don't like how they're coping with. I'm in a house of guys, and I don't identify with guys, and I don't identify as a guy. Like, this is not. It's fun. Don't get me wrong. It's fun to be here. I don't identify this way. Thank you. And also, what what is going on. This is like that. There's a lot of stuff going on that I'm super not comfortable with. And then I went to the Pride Institute, and in Pride Institute, I did the kind of the opposite of the polarity. So in Pride Institute, they were like, "Oh man, like I hate Christians, I hate Catholics. Most of the people that have an extensive understanding of the Bible are people that have been through some type of familial religious abuse, or community religious abuse. So that's like very serious, very, very serious stuff." And then I went there and I was like, I'm a Christian. And then they tried to tell me about the Bible, and I've read the Bible at that time. I was coming from Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge. I'd read the Bible, I had highlighted the Bible, I carried my Bible with me, it was on my nightstand when I went to sleep, type shit. So like we know, we're aware. And so we had to find some way to describe how it's like we try to carry Christ with us, um, because carrying Christ with us is uh, knowing God with us, right? And that's should be contextually and textually correct. But I am pagan because I don't care what your church says that I should believe. And frankly, fucking neither did Jesus. Isn't that right? So, and then pagan, because do you see that fire? Pagan Christian. So that's the unpack. Pagan being I'm nearly anti organized religion, but then Christian because it's like that's the way to approach that is to proverbially go into the churches and flip the tables and crack the whips, throw books. That's what you do. You don't do crazy stuff. You don't threaten people. You don't say God isn't real. You don't try to pervert the message to provide an example of how God can be weaponized and the idea of God can be weaponized. Moreover, you just challenge the church's authority. You challenge the organized religious sect's authority, and then you challenge it under the authority of God, and that's what you do as a Christian. And as a pagan Christian, that's what I do. So that's what I mean by pagan Christian. So then it drives me a little bit nuts because, people are trying to get me to understand the Bible and understand that Christianity is really bad. And I just looked them dead in their eyes and I said, I'm the bride of Christ. I'm the bride of Christ. Don't waste your time. It's like, imagine somebody pushing in autobiography. You're the bride of Christ too, by the way. But imagine somebody pushing an autobiography on you and being like, you don't know your husband. You don't know your husband until you have... Excuse me? Door's right there. Be careful. It closes automatically. I know my husband because we're married. He'll tell you the same. I don't need your autobiography, and I don't need your autobiography of his father. I am the bride of Christ. So are you. In that regard, That is a very Christian thing to do. To say, no, I do not need your Leviticus. Thank you. I respect that long-standing religious law has importance. We describe clean and unclean meats. We go through the laws. A lot of the things that are made to be illegal happen to be really beneficial if you're trying to form a long-standing like community of survival into abundance. So you're not just trying to survive until your tribe falls apart, but you're trying to create something everlasting. You're trying to have a moment where people are born into this world where just everything makes sense and there's a place to go, and everybody has a sense of belonging, and you don't have to fight for survival, and that's heaven. And you can live in heaven too. Heaven is a spiritual concept. It's also an actual spiritual anatomical concept for you and your body. There is a place in your mind that is heaven, and there is a place in your mind that is hell. There is also a potential astral and heavenly existence of heaven and hell, like an as above, so below of greater spirits. We have the greatest depths in the ocean versus the farthest out of the highest skies. So there may be a heaven out there, there may be a hell down there, but there is a place of holy light up here, and there is a place of fire right here. Which one rules you? Because to me, I don't like to be lukewarm. I like to be hot and cold at the same time. And so to clarify, right, it's not that I'm lukewarm about Christ or the Antichrist. It's that I'm almost certain the Antichrist would want me to see them as Christ. So ultimately, if I can't intellectualize or sense the difference between the two, there's functionally actually no difference. Not like as a delusion, there's no difference between Christ and the Antichrist. But if I go like this, up and down, so if we have the circles, give me a second. Okay, so this is the extra thin one? Dang it. All right, so here's this, okay? I'm saying if we live in a time loop, that might be the loop, right? If we zoom in, we're going to see like an onion shape until we get to this bottom part. This is where we are in the loop, okay? We're fully zoomed in. We're fully zoomed into the loop. We exist right here. This is our point, and we might think that this is a line, where over here is alpha, and over here is omega. So then we think, this is the timeline. And when you're Christian, the alpha is the omega. So that's the loop. Okay? And if I am somebody that just knows I have eternity, okay, I will sense that I've been going this way for a while, now I want to go this way. So there's a loop here that I'm borrowing, and then a loop here that I'm borrowing. So to me, there is no functional difference between one or the other. From my perspective, I look up over here, That's Christ. I swing down this way, I look up over here, that's Christ. What if, when Christ returns, the world is convinced that Christ is the Antichrist? But go on. Give me God's autobiography. Tell me that I'm wrong about my husband. Tell me that he doesn't love me as his bride. Please. Perhaps I'm misunderstanding. Perhaps I can't conceptualize. Perhaps my imagination isn't large enough to understand the divine. But the last time I checked, my brain wasn't quantized enough to understand how to navigate survival in this reality. So the only reason why I would still be existing right now is because of divinity. Not because I am divine, but because divinity exists. And now, since 12 years old, we can complete our journey that we started since 6 to 8 years old, trying to figure out if we can prove to ourselves that there is a God. And we won't be able to prove it to other people, but can we prove ourselves that there is a God? Considering we should be dead, I'm going to conclude that more importantly than trying to define God enough to say a Boolean identity of true or false, is God real or is God not? I think we can answer the question, is there divinity? Because in this concept here, right, another way to look at this is when you're in one loop, people will call the center of that loop, they'll call it God. And they'll keep telling you, this is what God is, and you can see everybody is moving according to the will of God. Okay? And then in another loop, the exact opposite direction. But then, in that loop, there is also a center to the radial rotation. It's a different rotation, and there's a lot of friction right here. And the singularity is right here. Now, that's the singularity that we've been saying looks like this, wherein there is a discrete step in the middle, mathematically. It's not that the devil doesn't exist. It's that the devil's greatest illusion is on the devil's own self. The devil wants, of all things, to believe that the devil has free will. God grants them the delusion of free will. That is to say, God also controls the devil. Not every little thing, okay? But the boundaries and the guardrails, all divine. So God, when you're at an intersection, Christ is your stoplights, okay? Don't go when the light is green. Don't go when the light is red. Go when the light is green. Hesitate when the light is yellow. Look for that obvious signs and wonder what your next moves should be. Christ, okay? God is the intersection itself. When you think you see the sign and wonder and you can identify Christ, you can see that the stoplight is green. But something about that intersection is just wrong and you don't know how to describe it. It's not quite It's just screaming out at you. There's not a direct sign, a red light telling you stop, but you're like, why is that person nearly falling off of their bike? So you slow down and you're like, are they going to need medical assistance? Your heart is just pulling you in this direction. All of a sudden, a car at 100 miles an hour goes across there, blowing a red light. Who just saved your life? Was it the bicyclist? Was it the stoplight? Was it your instinct? Was it your gut? That's how God operates. Even when God does a miracle, you'll never be able to prove it was God doing it. Good luck, right? God is the intersection itself, not the sidewalk, not the stoplights, not the bicyclist, not all of the cars, the entire thing. The entire thing, the intersection, the naming of it, the how you see it, that moment and your instincts and how you become part of the intersection when you're traveling through it is God. Christ is the stoplights. People can get confused and they can say, this is Christ. You know, they can have the wrong hesitation at the yellow light, and the cars behind them are like, you didn't need to stop. What are you doing? You're jamming up traffic. And they can have the wrong interpretation of Christ, because they can see that the light is yellow and they try to go through it and it ends up being a red light. And the bicyclist nearly falls off of their bike, seeing them accelerate when the crosswalk sign was about to start and the bicyclist was about to just get ahead of it just a little bit. And then you realize that you almost T-boned somebody, and thank God that you didn't. That's how I see the difference between the Father, the Holy Spirit, and Christ. The Father and the Holy Spirit are married to one another. That's where, when the Father is being the provider, and you worship the Holy Spirit, and not the Father, you can have some misinterpretations happen. It's not necessarily wrong. But one thing that you don't want to do is worship the creation over the Father. That's like walking into somebody's house and starting to talk to the artwork and ignoring the homeowner. I was like, sorry? Yeah, so, how long have you lived here? Can I help you with anything? Huh? No, I'm just getting acquainted. Right, when I'm the homeowner, so I can help you a lot with that. But that's perfectly fine. I understand that. You understand that? Yes, I do. So you just want to stand here and talk to the hanger? Is it a hanger? Is that what it is? Yeah, it's a hanger. Hello? 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 So does this one normally talk a lot like this, or what? Hello? 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 Now I think I'm gonna marry this thing. Okay? And that's the equivalent of what I've been kind of joking around and doing. Because, after psychiatry completely lobotomized my brain, I may have had a bit of an attitude towards the Father and Christ. I might have, because unlike the devil, okay, I have had free will. I just haven't. It's a very, very, very narrow thread and narrow path for me to actually choose that. And so the difference between me choosing to have free will and just having absolutely no free will is nearly the same thing. And unfortunately, not exactly the same thing. So I made a mistake in my interpretation. I should have just tried to take that discrete step sooner. But until I understood that, I didn't lie to God and say, I have faith in you, in the moments that I didn't have faith. And I am grateful for that, and I hope that God is grateful for that. And I didn't lie to Christ and say, I absolutely love you and I want to think about you every single day, performatively. I kind of just let that fall into the background because I wasn't feeling it anymore. And one really important thing as a wife, you should be to your husband is transparent and honest. And so I'm hoping that that's understood. Anyway, I'm a pagan Christian. No more psychiatric stuff other than transition stuff. Because it has taken me 3 years to recover from the 3 years of psychiatry wherein I was working for 3 years and not really functioning because somebody else had to completely prop me up. Even though I had all of the tools to survive, I did not have the competence to, because I didn't have the time to actually understand myself and how all of me works, and then how all of me works when also I'm being influenced by psychiatric drugs. Kind of by design if you think about it, because the psychiatric system doesn't really like their authority challenged at all. By the patient, by the government, by corporations that are saying, look, why don't we just give people the weed that they're asking for? Because it helps, you know? We live in an entire country of no, we don't want to give you the thing that works. We want to give you the stuff that has you keep coming back. Everything has to become a subscription model, because here, what we're going to do is we're going to build this perfect world in the future, and it's not going to be heaven because we're not religious.
Warning.
But our tribe is never going to die, and I'm telling you, well, that's hell. In which case, I don't co-sign the building of hell. But if you can sell to me bits and pieces of a project that isn't hell and confuse me and trick me into building hell, I suppose then technically I would co-sign building hell. But I can't just be like, yeah, let's manifest hell on earth, because that would be quite unchristian. There's always voice in my head's like, there's always an exception. There's always an exception. It's true. And it's not always easy to admit that. Most Christians would like to say, I know Christ, and I would be able to, and then they'll set the expectation. Like, imagine if God just took you seriously like that. I know Christ, and I would be able to separate Christ from the Antichrist. I would know which one is which. Really, would you? Let's go back to the model. So what you're effectively saying from my visual perspective is this. When you're going across this line, and you are looking respective from this line to here, okay? Now, you're on this line right here. You look up, there's Christ. Okay, you're getting to here. Alright, and what's going to happen is you're following this line, okay? We're going to the next line. Okay, in order to actually still have that be a worship of Christ, there has to be a quick rotation. And you're going to want that rotation right at this magical, miracle, discrete step. To go in between the two. Better represented is you're looking for a point right here. And at that point, you need to be able to identify where Christ is, because how you orient yourself is going to be how this works moving forward, okay? So if you're coming from this direction and you orient yourself towards Christ as you understand it, and you choose this one first, what's going to happen is you're going to say, yay, I'm still around that fulcrum, that center point. I knew it. And then all of a sudden, you're going to look up and you're under the Antichrist. How did that happen? Uh-oh. And then eventually, you're going to find your way back and you're going to say, right, this is obviously Christ. So now you have called Christ both the Antichrist and Christ, and it's been the same thing. If you change to this one here, then you will have Christ everlasting, and it's like a sine wave. Because you see this, you orient yourself, there's Christ in the moment, and then at this moment, we can't really know for sure, can we? So we just continue on our trajectory as we know it, and we start to have this, so it looks like that, and then it goes like this. We're looking for that magical discrete moment where there is an actual turning. Now, the turning is going to be completely indistinguishable to the larger picture, and when you're trying to describe it, people will be like, it's the same picture, right? It has rotational symmetry. Yeah. We've been talking about rotational symmetry for 3 years. So, are you keeping up? Because it's complex to understand how much this applies to the last 3 years and the 3 years before then, and from now until 30 years ago when I was 4 years old, and that version of me that's been talking about rotational symmetry for like obsessing over it for the last 20 years, and then for the last 10 years talking about we love rotational symmetry. We actually really, really, really like rotational symmetry. It's amazing for compression, right? You can take a very advanced idea and it becomes really simple. So that discrete step is like, here, we're under Christ, and now we're getting to right about, we started here, okay? Circle. Now, that's a triangle. Okay? So, from beginning, circle, and then we're going, and that's under Christ. We're going this way, and we hit this moment, and that's when, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Just remember which direction you're coming from, which direction you're going. And then in that discrete step, you should be looking for a rotation that happens. And then it continues. Now we're heading towards the triangle. And that's how you make it through like a Bakhtin moment, right? You gotta make it from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. You have to understand that actually, you're not stronger than prophecy. When prophecy says there's going to be a bunch of people that can't determine the difference between the Christ and the Antichrist, you ought not to think to yourself how you're going to be an exception to the prophecy and how God and God's prophets are going to be wrong, but you have to think to yourself how that can be when you can't even imagine that's possible. How can I confuse the Antichrist with the Christ? You'd have to ask yourself, and then you'd have to stop furrowing your eyebrows and raising your cheeks and looking down on everybody who doesn't know what's going on just like you do, and you'd have to go, do I know Christ? Do I know Christ over the next person? Do I know them more? Do I know Christ more than them, or do I know them more than Christ? Is there... Oh, I better get to know Christ then so I can be deceived into not knowing Christ, I guess, because yeah, I've got to keep trying to do my faithful duty, and then also I have to realize that I'm likely going to confuse Christ and the other, which is interestingly bizarre. Okay? Then you can also think of the triangle as an alpha and the circle as an omega. So then from my perspective, it's like a pendulum. This way, this way, this way, this way. Okay, I'm like, okay, I'm walking to Christ. Okay, we can use this as our totem. Okay, I'm walking to Christ now. I'm walking to Christ. I definitely have an image of Christ in my head. I know what that looks like. I'm not an idiot. And now that image is fading. I'm not entirely sure I know what I'm doing. And that might be the Antichrist. And now the Antichrist moved. Okay. And also that could be Christ. And maybe the Christ moved. But everything's kind of just going in this direction over here. So we're just going to keep on walking. And you know what? I know that image. I know that image. I can't be deceived that easily. Huh. Why did I get so confused about that a second ago? And actually, why did I think that I knew Christ more than I know Christ right now? That's so insane. I don't know Christ. I'd have to be one of the higher angels to actually be able to separate the two together. And here this prophecy has tricked me into, know what? Actually, I might know. I might know. But I'm getting used to this idea that I don't know more than anybody else. And I just love. It's teaching me to love, whether I am right or wrong, and whether the thing that I'm worshiping is right or wrong. I just love Christ. And so we have an up and we have a down. We have a skipping rock across the pathway. We have rotational symmetry woven into a discrete step wherein we can redraw this entire image. Alpha, omega, you can imagine is like that, but actually the alpha and the omega are one. Okay? So now, by trying to understand on my journey of trying to understand Christ, I can realize, wait a minute, right here. That's the direction of God, not Christ. I almost defined God. I almost created a false image of God in my mind. Oh, goosebumps. Oh, thank you, Christ. Thank you, Christ, for sparing me from that one. That's not what I wanted to do. I don't want to replace God. I don't want to define or offend God. I don't want to become God over other people. I don't want to know more than them. I want to just be a person like everybody else. So, I say again to you, it is a deeply religiously held belief. We had a blank screen for a while. I'm like, what? It's a deeply religiously held belief. Christ is the one that I follow. And now I will consistently become, and this is how this works. We can imagine that this is a true wheel, but this is actually very, very, very wicked. Like without a square and compass, I can't actually show you how perfect these things can align into discrete steps and stuff like that. But each part of that circle that is bent and a little bit ajar, like a wheel that has 2/10 of spokes in some areas and 2 loose of spokes in another area, as the road and it being used continues, its wear becomes inconsistent, and the true that it starts with, being created in the image of God, slowly becomes wicked and sinful. And that is to say, then, once we have strayed from our path, using the sin which we're just born with, because we're not actually like perfect spokes in perfect circles. God just starts us in that image, and then we veer from God over and over and over again. So we will from Christ too. I'll think that I'm worshiping Christ. I'll be wrong. But the important part is that when I realize I'm wrong, I'll correct. And in that regard, then, I can view this entire infinite idea of the alpha way over there, the omega way, way, way over there. And then I can also view it as the alpha and the omega right here. They're the same, and they're omnipresent, and they're omnipotent. And they are one. They are God. Isn't that neat? It's like we should be taught geometry and sacred geometry before we're taught math, because mathematics actually uses those sacred geometries. And there's practical uses for those sacred geometries and for the mathematics. That's why we live in such a technocratic and technological world. But at the end of the day, all of the mathematics that make up all of the fancy machines and lights that we're living in right now are mathematics that were made possible only by the sacred geometry that also points towards the idea of divinity. And if there is oneness in divinity, then there is potentially either a singular point that is infinitesimally small and godly, large, and infinite at the same time. That would be what a lot of people are referring to as closer to the monad. And then we have all of the angels, and we have God, and God is potentially the monad. I don't know. But moreover, I think that God is that singular point in the circle that people keep on. And a lot of times when people are referring to God, using the word God, they're referring to their own inner image of God, which is already like bastardized and filled with sin and wickedness. God hates fags. That is a statement per se filled with sin. You in this moment are more worried about being more correct and more righteous than the next person, than worried about tending to and caring for your husband, your partner. You are being unfaithful to your husband and to your father, either in law or directly, however you may view, and you're doing so that you can take the privilege of your relationship with your father and your husband and put yourself above other people, but specifically the relationship with your father and your husband, where your husband and your father don't want you to do that specific thing with their name, and you have done that thing. Does that make sense? And in the same breath that you're saying God's will can be interpreted and God's wants for us can be interpreted, and I will interpret that for you if you can't interpret it for yourself. And if you don't agree with me, then you can't interpret it for yourself. You're opening yourself up to your own punishment because you're saying that it's allowed and that it's necessary because you're inflicting it on others. The eternal panic of saying you are going to hell for the immutable characteristics that I say with certainty that if God were important in your life, you would find a way to make mutable. Okay, now if God has made those characteristics immutable, under God, you have spoken blasphemy against his spirits, see, and spirit. Because I don't define God, I struggle a lot less with this terror of God, and I just have a regular fear of God. That moment where I'm like, did I just define God? Let me clarify. I don't know God. I won't know God until this my instantiation of life and consciousness is over. I won't know. I maybe have known before, but certainly not in this body. As is ordained for me to understand in the texts, I don't know. I will go through Christ and I might discover the Father that way. The only way that I can come to know the Father is through Christ. And I've demonstrated that, right? I'm following Christ. I'm following Christ. I realize that's the direction of the Father. But I say carefully, the direction, because this picture on the wall was actually a bit wicked, wasn't it? It kind of had a little bit of sin there, a little bit of error, and calling something that isn't perfect God is calling God imperfect. Don't do that. Don't do that. A lot of people do that. I observe that it appears to be a mistake wherein they receive in themselves the penalty of the error which is due. Now that's a St. Paul quote. All right? But yeah, I'm a pagan Christian, and if people would take a little bit of time to listen to what I'm saying and understand that I've got multiple personalities rattling around in this brain, that would be great. Because I'm not Phi, and I hope that that's relevant to you. And I hope it's relevant to you because like I need you to understand, otherwise I won't be able to survive. And then I won't be able to help.